So we'll make a start. So we'll start off as usual with our seated, settling mini meditation practice. So come into that comfortable, steady, seated posture. You can place the hands in a mudra, such as the Chen or the Gyan mudra, or another hand gesture of your own choosing. And then just allowing the eyes to softly, gently close. And that feeling of fully arriving into this present moment, of dropping down into gentle presence and gentle stillness. Just becoming aware of the physical layer of the body. Becoming aware of the contact that the base of the body makes with the earth, the ground beneath, deeply anchored, deeply rooted here. And then upwards from those deep roots, have this sense of just lengthening, gently elongating through the spine, and the head is placed nicely on top. Relax, relax, shoulders, abdomen, the face, the jaw. Body soft and relaxed. Awareness now on the breath. Noticing the natural rhythm of the breath. Following each inhale and each exhale. Noticing each breath and the little pauses, the brief, natural, momentary pauses that lie in between each breath. Allowing every single breath to bring you into the present moment. Now, taking your awareness to the heart-mind, the mental and emotional layer. Just observing, is the mind racing, full of activity, thinking about what has happened or what's to come next? Or maybe the mind is comparatively still and calm at this point, just observing that without judgment. And I have a sense that you're now placing your awareness towards the heart space, Hridaya Akash, that space in the very core, the center of your being. Your awareness focused in that area. As you listen to the following words, Om. Salutations to all the saints, the sages, the siddhas, yoginis and wisdom masters of all times and spaces. Salutations to my gurus. Salutations to my own blessed self. Awakening is my birthright. It is as inevitable as the sunrise. Now is the time that has been appointed for countless lifetimes. I shall delay no longer. I claim my natural state, basic sanity, for the benefit of all beings. I activate the power of my essence nature, my Atma Shakti, and I connect to and embody my essence nature for the benefit of all beings. I shall not waste this golden opportunity. I shall use my time well. By the grace of the lineage and the power of my own practice, may I increasingly display and embody these signs of immersion into my essence nature. Those are total self-acceptance, non-reactivity, and clarity of view in all situations, taking responsibility for my own inner state, sober connection to my real situation, ability to reflect upon my mistakes without self-judgment, being free of attachment to praise and blame, being free of complaint, being comfortable in my own skin, experiencing effortless effort, ease, and flow in life. May I increasingly display and embody these signs of immersion into my essence nature. May I birth a strong energy body that can digest all experiences. May I be free of ownership and denial of ownership. May I see all feelings as nothing but energy. May I digest my stories and realize my energy as pure power. May I wake up from the dream of the contents of thought to describe or define me, and thereby realize the truth of who I am. May I have the pure motive, and may all beings benefit. Om. And keeping your awareness of the heart space, let us now chant 3 Oms together. So, awareness to the breath, and first of all, taking that deep inhale. So bringing your awareness back into the space by gently opening your eyes. So, you should be seeing my screen now, is that right? Can you see me? Okay, that's great. So welcome to this second session in this series on the Yoga of Philosophy. You don't necessarily have to have watched the first session to make sense of this second one, actually. Although I think it's a good idea, if you haven't already, to go back and watch the first session whenever you are able to. So in this session, part 2, we're looking at the subject of ontology. So, what is ontology? So the word ontology literally means the science of being, or something along those lines. Like almost all words in philosophy, I believe it has Greek origins, the word. So broadly speaking, ontology can be said to deal with questions concerning what really exists. So those kinds of questions that sometimes philosophers get a bit of a bad rap for exploring because they seem so vast and far away from everyday practical concerns. But I would say that they're very important, remain very important questions, because our worldview on what really exists is going to have quite a consequence on our beliefs and views and actions in many other areas. But anyway, these questions are the kinds of questions that we presumably have been asking since very ancient times, before written records began. In the West, the ancient Greek philosopher Parmenides is usually considered to be the father of ontology. So there were some philosophers before Parmenides that were asking questions about what is the universe made out of. But it's Parmenides really who really began to study these questions in a rigorous, systematic way. So this is going to be a recurrent theme in this series. We'll begin each session by having a little look at what the ancient Greeks in particular had to say about these questions before we move on to look at what Indian thought had to say. Why? Well, I think it's a nice basis for comparison. And after all, ancient Greek thought is doubtlessly the root, the base of Western thought, Western philosophy. But of course, there's many other different world philosophies that unfortunately we just don't have the time or scope to explore. So in the remaining fragments of his only surviving work, entitled On Nature, Parmenides explains how all reality is, in actuality, one. Furthermore, that change is impossible and that existence is timeless, uniform, necessary. He calls this the way of truth. The view that all is, in truth, one became known as monism in the West. So why does reality appear as a plurality then? That is, as many things. And why does change and time appear so real to us? Parmenides explains this world of appearances as an illusion. And he calls this the way of opinion, in which one's sensory faculties lead to conceptions which are actually false and deceitful. So I want you to keep this in mind as we explore Indian philosophy, some strands of which, and I'm thinking here in particular of the non-dual school of Advaita Vedanta, which bear a striking resemblance to the thought of Parmenides, as we will see. Now, the opposite of monism is the philosophy of pluralism. And this is the doctrine that there are in fact many different substances in nature that constitute reality. So take, for example, the ancient Greek philosopher Empedocles. who is best known for originating the cosmogonic theory of the four classical elements, namely fire, air, water, and earth. Now, I've said that they originated with him, but it may be that this notion of 4 or 5 elements goes back further than Empedocles, because it's a recurrent theme in many cultures around the world, this idea of 4 or 5 main elements. Interestingly, he also proposed 2 forces, which he named, once translated, love and strife, which would mix and separate the elements respectively. So that's quite interesting. It has some resonance, maybe not exactly the same, but resonance with Eastern concepts such as yin and yang. You know, this idea that there's 2 opposite forces acting in the universe, namely love and strife.
But Prakriti and Purusha, to translate it as that.
Well, it possibly, yes, possibly. I think it's a bit of, a little bit of a different thing.
Okay, thank you.
But yeah, we could do, something that'd be worth a little further study. Yeah. So moving on, atomism. I'm just muting people. Of course, if a question arises, do feel free to unmute yourself. So atomism, often associated with, Democritus is how we pronounce it, Democritus, probably more like it, is a natural philosophy proposing that the physical world is composed of innumerable, fundamental, and indivisible components known as atoms. The very definition of an atom is that it's indivisible. So actually, funnily enough, in modern science, atoms are misnamed because you can split atoms, so they're not strictly atoms. Anyhow, Democritus's argument for the existence of these atoms hinged on the idea that it is impossible to keep dividing matter for infinity, and that matter must therefore be made up of extremely tiny particles. So this is another influential strand in thoughts, in Greek thought, and then it was taken up by the Romans. And you're going to say something? And obviously, needless to say, it's parallels with modern atomic theory. So before we move on to explore what yoga and other Indian philosophies had to say about these things, let us look at the thought of Heraclitus. Often contrasted with that of Parmenides, his near contemporary. Heraclitus is most well known for his insistence on ever-present change, flux, or becoming as a characteristic feature of the world. As stated in his most well-known saying, his most well-known quote that you may have heard of, "No man ever steps in the same river twice." The full quote actually is, "No man, and presumably woman either, ever steps in the same river twice, because it's not the same river, and he is no longer the same man. Everything's always undergoing change." Heraclitus is thus often identified as the first exponent of what's known as process philosophy, or the ontology of becoming, the view that change is the cornerstone of reality. So again, I'd like you to keep the thought of Heraclitus in mind as we investigate the various strands of Indian philosophy, particularly Buddhism, which has some obvious striking parallels with its emphasis on impermanence and change, plus numerous other similarities. So we're going to explore what all the various, well, not all, we're not going to be able to cover all of the schools, but we're going to look at quite a few of the schools, the Indian schools, that is, the Darshanas, and what they had to say about this topic. So first looking at the Vaiseshika and Nyaya schools. So we're beginning by looking at the 6 Vedic or Astika schools. So if you're not sure what that means, then it's all explained in part 1 in the first session. You know, the 6 affirming or orthodox Vedic schools. In particular, this pair, Vaiseshika and Nyaya. However, the focus is going to be on the Vaiseshika because the Nyaya were more concerned with logic and epistemology, the nature of knowledge, than ontological matters. So the Vaiseshika upholds a thoroughgoing pluralistic realism. So what does this mean? Well, they believe that the world is composed of a multitude of objects that exist independently of our experience of them. A multitude of objects, that's why they're pluralists. And they're realists because they believe that these things really exist, you know, outside of our experience, outside of our consciousness. More specifically, the Vaiseshika were atomists, just like the atomists of ancient Greece. For them, all material objects are made up of atoms, the Sanskrit word being paramanu, which are tiny, eternal, and again, indestructible realities. The word Vaiseshika itself means distinguishing feature or particularity. And this system can be said to represent an ancient Indian attempt to investigate and justify what is often called a common sense view of reality. In other words, as realists, they believe in an exact correspondence between words and the objects those words are referring to. So this view is sometimes referred to as naive realism. Usually, obviously, the people who hold the view don't call themselves naive realists. So this school classifies all objects of experience into 6 padartha, or categories, very, very much into classifying and categorizing reality. And these 6 categories are as follows: substances, dravya; qualities, gunas, of which there are 24 in this school. In Sankhya and Yoga, as we'll see, there's 3 gunas. Then we have karma, generality; samanya, particularity. Sorry, action means karma, of course. Generality is the translation of samanya, and particularity is the translation of visesha. And then inherence, samavaya. And later a 7th category was added, namely absence or non-being, abhava. So most definitely realists, because even things that are not present, that are absent, also have a certain exist in a way, in a certain way. Anyway, we don't have time to cover all of that in detail. What we're going to just have a closer look at is that category called dravya, or substance. So there are 9 substances listed, and 5 of these are physical substances. So these are earth, prithvi, water, up, fire, tejas, air, vayu, and space, akasha. Just for a moment, just recall those 4 elements of Empedocles. In this particular school, and in many Indian schools, a 5th element, the element of space, is also recognized. Differences between material objects reflect differences in the ratio of basic substances contained within them. So, for example, hard objects like stones contain more earth atoms, whilst milk, for example, contains more water atoms. The 5 elements each possess a unique quality which correspond to one of the 5 physical senses. So smell for earth, taste for water, color for fire, touch for air, sound for space, respectively. And this view is actually one that's shared also by the Sankhya and Yoga schools. Now, the remaining 4 substances are non-material substances, and these are time, kala, space, dik, soul, atman, and mind, manas. So, the very fact that the Vaiseshika accepts such substances means that even though that they're realists, they're not materialists, because they also believe that these non-material substances exist. So they're quite interesting. When we come to the session on self and Atman, the soul, there's a whole session on that. We'll have a little bit of a closer look at what that school had to say. They had a very interesting theory on the soul. But for now, we're going to move on and explore the Sankhya and the Yoga schools. So for those who have already seen part 1, you may already know that these 2 schools are very closely related, so much so that we can, at least here, talk about them as a pair, the Sankhya Yoga school. So, Sankhya as a word, depending on context, means to reckon, to count, to enumerate, to calculate, to deliberate, and reason. So this is the philosophical school that's really based on systematic enumeration and rational examination. So Sankhya Yoga is usually considered to be realist. This is the general view, just like the Vaiseshika. Again, believing that the world really exists independently of our experience, and that we can indeed come to know and understand that world. Sankhya Yoga is also usually regarded as strongly dualist. And that's so because it regards the universe as consisting of these 2 realities: Purusha, which literally means person, but in this context means something like spirit or consciousness, and Prakriti, meaning matter and energy. Yeah, it has to be matter and energy, because importantly, it's not just matter. It's matter and matter energy together. Sometimes also translated as nature. Or a personal favorite of mine is this word procreatrix. I've mentioned it in a previous satsang. It's just quite nice because I believe it comes from the same roots. It's also a feminine word, procreatrix, and it nicely captures the fact that Prakriti is this feminine energy that gives birth to the universe, as it were. So Sankhya Yoga teaches that Prakriti is comprised of 3 different gunas. We've heard that word already. Meaning literally something like strands or qualities is another way of putting it. And these could be discerned in the cosmos as a whole and in each individual person. So taking it very briefly, first we have sattva, or intelligence, and that's the closest to Purusha. Then we have rajas, passion, physical or mental energy. Then we have tamas, inertia, sometimes written about as the lowest of the gunas, but nevertheless, and is very important, has an important role to play in itself. So according to the standard cosmogonical interpretation of Sankhya, at the very beginning, the 3 gunas coexisted harmoniously in what's known as Mula Prakriti, or the primal Prakriti. But the presence of this Purusha disturbed this equilibrium, and it set off a process of emanation, and then this unfolding of 24 evolutes, or principles of reality, that we call tattvas, which we don't have time to explore today, I'm afraid, but earlier this year, I did record a session on the tattvas, specifically the Shaiva tattvas. There's more of them, but it does include the 24 Sankhya tattvas. So if you want to find out more about those, I can direct you towards that recording. So that's the standard interpretation of Sankhya philosophy. I now just want to quickly draw attention to an alternative interpretation of Sankhya and yoga, metaphysics, that has recently been offered by Michael Burley, who, by the way, is at the University of Leeds. So Burley argues that Sankhya Yoga actually never intended to give a realist cosmogonical account of how the universe came into being at all. Its purpose never was to show how the universe was created or came into being. Rather, it's meant to provide a phenomenological analysis of experience. But wait, what is phenomenology? Well, briefly put, it is the study of structures of consciousness as experienced from the first person point of view. So in Burley's view, Sankhya Yoga metaphysics attempts to map out how we as human beings experience the world around us. As he notes himself, like Kant, and like certain phenomenological philosophers of more recent times, Sankhya and Yoga did not, I think, begin with fanciful speculations about the sorts of entities that exist beyond the reaches of our experience. Rather, they began with a careful and systematic analysis of experience itself. So, it's a very interesting thesis and an interesting book that Burley has written. However, it's pretty inaccessible unless you have at least a degree level knowledge of philosophy. And his talks as well are quite are quite hard if you don't have the existing knowledge. Nevertheless, it's a very interesting take on Sankhya and yoga, and I think definitely deserves to be considered seriously.
Why does he think that then? Why does everyone else think it's a cosmo?
Oh, because that's the standard interpretation.
Why is he interpreted different then?
Well,
does he explain that?
Of course he does, yeah. That's what the book's about. So, if anybody is interested, I can direct you towards that particular book and the talks that he's done.
Ben, can I just ask a question?
Yes.
Maybe where is not the right way to start this. To what extent is morality discussed within the context of these different schools of thought, and where then does it fit in to the various elements that they're referring to, or is this something that's beyond that conversation?
So I do. Well, first thing to say is that I do have a session planned on ethics, the philosophy of ethics and morality. So there will be a whole session on that.
Sign me up for that one.
Yeah, so that is coming up, and I'm having to do a little bit more research on that as well. So yeah, definitely join us for that one if that's something that you're very interested in. I mean, it was the view. It was often said by many philosophers that Indian philosophy lacked an ethical kind of moral component, but work's been done more recently that I think is starting to disprove that, and there's a very strong moral component to these various schools. But as I said, that's an area in which I myself have to do a little bit more research before I can get back to you with a full answer.
But is that not where the yamas and the niyamas come in?
Well, yes, there is, of course, the yamas and the niyamas, which are, for those who don't know, there's a kind of a code of ethical observances and restraints that appear in some of the schools. They appear in Jainism and Buddhism and in yoga. So that will doubtlessly be discussed in that particular session that I mentioned. So if we just get back to the slide, or the next slide. So it's already been mentioned that Sankhya yoga is dualistic, or at least that's how I would say the majority of scholars would argue that anyhow. Let us explore that just a little bit further. So in Western philosophy and religion, there's often been a perceived division between body and mind. So this is another thing we'll explore when we get to the topic on the self. But this dualism goes back to maybe to Plato, definitely to Descartes, and this is widely known as dualism. Now, Sankhya Yoga is also a dualism, but it's a dualism of a quite different kind to this Western counterpart. And this has quite important consequences. Specifically, Sankhya Yoga differs from most Western schools of dualism by regarding not just the physical body, but also the mind, ego, and the cognitive functions as belonging to this realm of prakriti, or matter, energy. So the dualism here is not between body and mind, the mind being just another part of prakriti like the body. The dualism is between matter, energy, and this other thing, this purusha, this spirit or consciousness or soul, whatever you might like to translate it as. So this dualist position distinguishes Sankhya Yoga from Advaita Vedanta and also Kashmir Shaivism, which we are going to come to soon, which are both resolutely non-dual philosophies. So just very briefly, just one slide for this school, I believe, is the Purva Mimamsa school, which translates as something like the prior exegesis school. So if you were here last time or watched the recording, you may recall that this school is all about correct interpretation of the Vedas, particularly its ritualistic portions. The central aim of this school is the elucidation of the nature of Dharma, understood as a set of ritual obligations and prerogatives to perform properly, how we should behave, essentially, in order to maintain the harmony of the universe. So the Mimamsa is yet another school that advocates a pluralistic realism. The fact is that most of these orthodox Vedic schools did advocate a realist view of the world, i.e. believing in the reality of the external world and of individual souls. So this school has a mechanistic view of creation. Everything comes into existence through natural processes, and the notion of God is ruled out as an unnecessary hypothesis. Furthermore, the world was never created, has never been destroyed, and has existed eternally as it is now. Reminds one somewhat of the steady state theory of the universe in physics. The idea that the universe is now as it has always been. Okay, so we're now just going to have a quick look at the Charvaka school. So this is not one of the orthodox Vedic schools, by the way, but we're going to explore them just because they do seem to be closely related somewhat to the Mimamsa, or at least the scholar Johann Bronkhorst believes. Also sometimes known as the Lokayatas. They're often represented as being anti-Vedic. However, it appears that most, if not all, Charvakas were actually cynical Brahmins, as Johann Bronkhorst calls them, i.e. Brahmins who didn't really believe in things like God and soul and rebirth. Now, the Charvakas are also realists, but take realism to the next level, as it were. As staunch materialists who believe only in what can be perceived with the senses, they reject supernatural notions, such as God, soul, and rebirth. So this is the kind of passage that's attributed to the Charvakas. So we only have a few fragments left, literally enough to fill a couple of pages is all we have left, just fragments. There is no other world other than this. There is no heaven and no hell. The realm of Shiva and like regions are fabricated by stupid impostors.
Are they like atheists?
Yeah, well, that's what you would call them. Yeah. But then again, to be philosophically, technically accurate, many of the schools we've already looked at are also atheists, in the sense that they don't believe in a personal creator God.
So are these all the ones that we just talked about, the Carvacias and the other two on those other slides? Are they schools that have come out of the whatnot yoga that we've just been talking about? What's the name that begins with S? The
Sankhya.
Yeah, Sankhya yoga. In the same way that the Sampradayas come out of the Tantric, if you see what I mean.
Not really. No, they're not. No, they're not. They're not sub schools of Samkhya and yoga. They're
separate. Yeah,
separate schools. That are related in that they all trace back. They all trace back to the Vedas.
Right.
Arguably, even the Charvakas, even though they might be skeptical of some of the notions within the Vedas.
And so this is all much earlier then than the Tantric ones?
Yes, that's right. Yes. Yes. Well, it started earlier.
Yeah.
It started earlier, but there were still scholars of these schools at the same time as the Tantric schools. Yeah. But yeah, they can definitely be traced back to an earlier date.
Yeah.
I'm intentionally not providing much information about dates in this series. Yeah. So the final of the Vedic schools is the school of Advaita Vedanta. So, as discussed last time, there are many different branches of Vedanta, but the one that we're going to focus on here is that branch known as the Advaita, which posited a radical monism. However, in India, it's more accurately called non-dualism, which literally means not two. So in contrast to the dualist Sankhya yoga philosophy of the two realities, Purusha and Prakriti, the non-dual philosophy of Advaita Vedanta declares that there is only one reality, that there's no second, that all that exists is one, and that one is given the name Brahman. And this Brahman is identical with Atman, the immutable, essential self, our true self, that constitutes the ultimate reality of all beings. So there is argument among scholars as to whether Advaita Vedanta is realist or idealist in its metaphysics. I would tentatively put forward that it's a type of critical realism. So that's a view that believes that the world really exists. Brahman exists, but that we can't really know. Well, most of us, most of the time anyway, don't really have access to that reality as it really is.
Can I just clarify, because I'm confused?
Yes.
Don't Advaita Vedantas believe in Maya, illusion?
Yes.
So isn't it being critiqued by the Tantrikas that they're actually non-dual because they see illusion?
Yeah. Yes, that's right.
Right. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll probably be mentioning that later on.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, that's a
interrupting.
So
Sorry
yeah,
for interrupting.
that's a yeah. And what Joy's referring to there is a tantric critique of Advaita Vedanta that we will be exploring shortly.
Sorry to confuse things.
It's not confusing anything. So, for the Advaita Vedanta school, the everyday world of diversity is nothing more than an illusory appearance. So that's where this word, Maya, comes in. The world as we normally see it is a false appearance brought about by ignorance, avidya, of the identity of the Atman with Brahman. So thus, in this school, there are two levels of truth, two levels. The ultimate truth, that is, reality is viewed from the non-dualistic perspective of Brahman realization, and then practical truth, the day-to-day truth, that for some people is the only truth, but for everybody is the practical truth that we have to be able to live in the world. So compare this with Parmenides, yeah? If you can think back to the beginning of this session, and his way of truth and way of opinion. So again, really quite similar, because Parmenides also taught this doctrine of unity, and everything is one. Sorry. Yeah, we've just, the table's broken.
Sorry.
It's just an illusion there.
It's just an illusion.
So, yeah, just a point of comparison there between the two philosophers, the two philosophies. I'm not saying that they're exactly the same, but drawing the comparison. So
something, Ben.
Yeah.
So are they trying to say that there is no physical world at all?
Well, again, it comes down to these two levels. On the empirical level, yes, there's a real physical world, but the higher truth is that, that's ultimately an illusion, that there is just the one. Yeah. The one thing called Brahman. Yeah. So this is kind of what the criticism that Joe there was alluding to. This criticism that's leveled at them in their insistence to reject duality as only provisionally real. Then it's been argued that they end up with just yet another dualism. This time the duality between the real and the illusory. If everything is Brahman, then what exactly is this thing called Maya? And the early Vedantins bypass this dilemma by simply saying mysteriously that Maya is inexplicable, hardly a satisfying explanation. So I'm sure there's many an Advaita follower who would argue against and reject the criticism, but that's the argument that's posed against the classical school. So I'm moving away now from the Vedic schools to look at the non-Vedic, the non-affirming, the Nastika schools. So the Buddhist view on things, a little bit different. Now, it's sometimes claimed that the historical Buddha was unconcerned about metaphysical questions regarding the nature of reality, and that he discouraged his disciples from asking such questions. More accurately, though, there was probably rigid attachment to views that the Buddha was warning against, which tend to get in the way of direct knowledge and self-awakening. But regardless, in time, numerous schools of philosophy emerged within Buddhism that did explore these issues. And this philosophical trend is called the Abhidharma. So the central issue for these emerging schools of Buddhist philosophy was the search for a way of speaking about reality without slipping into the conventional discourse of persons, objects, and substances. In effect, they were trying to avoid that naive common sense realism displayed by the Vedic schools of thought, particularly the Vaiseshika and the Nyaya. Their answer was to develop a form of discourse based upon this notion of dharmas. So now this term dharma has innumerable meanings, many meanings in Indian culture, different meanings in different contexts. But in this context of Abhidharma, or Buddhist philosophy, dharmas are the mental and material micro-events that constitute reality as we know it. The world as analysed by the Abhidharma is not one of trees, plants, mountains, tables, books, or persons. Rather, it is a world of momentary events, or dharmas. Now, this concept of impermanence, it has a name, it's called anicca in Pali, in the Pali language. So what we conventionally refer to as a person, for example, is in reality a continuously changing continuum of moments of experience, a stream of evanescent dharmas following each other in quick succession. Such quick succession that the illusion of persistence is maintained. A bit like, the metaphor that's often given is twirling a fire stick or a sparkler around. And it can, if done quick enough, create this illusion of being a stable, consistent circle. So this flow of consciousness arises and ceases in every moment, as if it were the stream of a river. So again, this metaphor of a river is used. And here it's just worth mentioning Heraclitus and his theory, very similar theory of flux and change.
But I say like everything is impermanent, like it's not really, nothing is really solid. Like it's just atoms vibrating. And atoms vibrating and that they come into being and go out of being. Like existential philosophy.
Yeah, but it's a philosophy of like moment to moment.
Rather than,
like, yeah.
Okay.
These dharmas, as I've said, are kind of like these micro events. A bit like the frames on a.
So is there no past, present, or future then?
On a film.
Is there no time?
They are each static, but they're displayed in such quick succession that it seems to show a continuous
story.
Yeah, film.
So there's no time.
No time.
Past, present, future. They not view that.
I would suspect.
No.
Yeah.
Yes.
I would. Well, I would have to look into
Okay.
that. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. I should say that. I mean, I've got a broad knowledge of all these different schools, but I don't class myself as an expert in any single one. Buddhist philosophy is such a huge area that even I've only really touched the surface, really. So the various Buddhist traditions rejected the notion of Atman, seeing it as an unwarranted and unverifiable metaphysical postulate. So for the Buddhists, there is no Atman or essential self underlying the changing stream of events which constitutes the mind-body complex.
So you believe in consciousness or Brahman or whatever name you want to give it?
No, not really. No. The Buddhists instead taught a doctrine of anatman, or no abiding self. So again, not the next one, but the one after that, the fourth session in the series, is all about Atman, about theories of the soul and of the self. So we'll be having a closer look, a much more detailed look at what the Buddhists and other schools had to say about that. So many different schools arose within Buddhism. One highly sophisticated school is the Yogacara, or the practice of yoga school, also sometimes known as the Vijnana Vada, or the consciousness-only school. So this school dispensed with the language of externality entirely in favor of a fully internalized and phenomenological, that word again, account of what appears to consciousness. This no longer requires one to posit external objects as the cause of one's experience, since one can talk about consciousness events without recourse to metaphysical postulates, such as an external world. As such, they have typically been regarded as propounding a form of subjective idealism. So that's the form of thought that basically teaches the world, the world as we know it is created in the mind, and there's no need to postulate an external world that is a cause of those mental events.
But that's what they do. Consciousness only means different to the consciousness of Brahma. It's a consciousness only school, yes?
Yes.
Are they saying we create it through, they mean conscious, they're using a little c for consciousness, if you like, that we're creating it through the mind. Our reality, we're creating our reality. Is that what they're saying?
Well, you can put it, to put it in a nutshell, yes.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
But that's
not necessarily saying, by the way, that nothing outside your own mind exists, but just that if there is such an external world, we don't know it. All we know is the world of our mind. Yes.
So that's indoctrination from when we're born. Then, is that what they would say then? Because you could train us to be different.
I suppose so. Yes. Yeah. As you've often said. Yeah. So this is an idealist point of view, as opposed to the realist point of view expressed by most of the Vedic schools. Just having a minute. Check the chat box. Because when I'm sharing the screen, you see I can't see the chat box. So the view of Kashmir Shaivism. Oops. So, Kashmir Shaivism. It's the name given to that post-scriptural phase of Shaiva Tantra. So, well, I am giving dates here, occurring between about 900 and 1100 of the Common Era. Now, particularly flourished in the Valley of Kashmir, hence the name. And the word exegesis means the explanation, interpretation of scriptural materials. Now, a more accurate name for this tradition is Trika Shaivism. Now, like the Advaita Vedanta, this tradition teaches a non-dualist view. That is, holding that one thing alone truly exists, namely divine consciousness, capital C, consciousness, or Shiva, as it's sometimes termed. And this displays itself in various permutations. So in this non-dual Shaiva Tantra, we might say that this experiencing of divinity in and as all things is the goal. As it expresses the view that everything arises from consciousness, this tradition is normally classed as idealist. And indeed, it does exhibit influence from Buddhist schools, such as the Yogacara. Yeah. So it does draw influence from the Yogacara school. But also it draws upon other schools as well. The Sankhya Yoga school, for example, the Tattvas, and other things. Another important element of Trika philosophy is the active and dynamic nature of consciousness, which is described as the spontaneous vibration or the pulsation, spanda is the Sanskrit word, of this universal consciousness, which is an expression of its own freedom, swatantriya, and power, shakti. Because of this, despite being idealist, this philosophy affirms the reality of the world and everyday life as a real transformation, a real manifestation or appearance, abhasa, of the absolute consciousness. So even though everything is one, all the uniqueness and diversity of the world is also embraced and recognized. So this is why adherents of this tradition consider it superior to Advaita Vedanta. Although the fact is that in modern times, Advaita Vedanta actually does teach this more tantric view. So when we're saying it's superior, we're really talking about the classical old Advaita Vedanta specifically. It's more, the Advaita Vedanta is become more influenced by Tantra perhaps than they know or admit. Anyway, the classical version seems to deny the full reality of the world and considers it instead as that illusion, Maya. So this is why non-dual Shaiva Tantra offers a much more life-affirming approach compared to Advaita Vedanta and the other schools that we've looked at for that matter, which on the whole do tend to work towards worldly renunciation and asceticism. So that's the Shaiva Tantra view, but briefly. Last, but certainly not least. So that's the end of the slides for this session. So we've covered many different viewpoints about what exists, if anything exists, if it's real or just an illusion created by the mind and such, whether the reality is a plurality, of many different things, atoms, for example, or whether it's a more fundamental duality, two fundamental principles, or perhaps even a more fundamental unity, a oneness that underlies everything. So is there any questions, discussion points anybody would like to raise?
Well, for me, it makes the Shiva Tantra philosophy look very, very straightforward now. It makes total sense. And when you got to the end, and that's what we were just talking about just now, I'm sort of thinking, yeah, absolutely, this makes complete sense to me. Whereas the other schools, a lot of that stuff has just totally blown my mind. And I don't know whether it's because we've spent a lot more time, talking about the tantric stuff.
Yeah, we have.
Which we certainly have.
Overall, in recent satsangs and through Taka, we've talked a lot about the tantric view. Yes.
So, are a lot of them really trying to say that even the elements, that the elements, air, earth, water, fire, actually don't exist? Then that the physicality of everything, us even, is not real. It's just blow my head off.
Yeah, but Tantra also says that the physicality of us is not real. That we're just vibrating particles, aren't we?
I've got my head around this.
So some Tantra practices, they get you to connect with the energy, body that like I've done Tantra practices where I've had to stare at a wall for ages with the hope that I'd eventually see that the wall is just vibrating, and that actually if I wanted to I could put my hand through the wall. That's not ever happened to me in the meditation practices where I've had to stare at a wall, but that is a tantric practice that really we don't really exist. So I don't know.
Well, it is, but on the other hand, it does embrace the reality
that the wall is there
of the world. It's a manifestation.
Yes, it does.
Of consciousness.
Yes, it does.
So it's real in that sense. So.
Whereas some of the others don't embrace. But I quite like what are they called? The Brahmins that went rogue. Because they say there's no hell, there's no heaven. I mean, there's a lot to be said for their philosophy. Well, I mean, they're really down
there's not really enough left, to really call. I mean, it was a philosophy, I suppose, but there's only fragments left. So, but yeah, it does resonate.
So what you're
does resonate with me for sure. Being, of a, the most.
Who resonates with you, Ben? Who resonates with you?
Well, the Chavakas, really. Yeah. Yeah, just because well, I have my own, skepticisms about some of the notions that are in the Vedas and texts like that, and it's not saying.
Can I ask about?
Yeah.
When you go, Ben.
No, it's fine. Yeah, please.
No, I was just, I've, since you had the slide up about the Buddhist interpretation, I've been pondering that for the last 10 minutes. And when you were saying about how consciousness arises and ceases, and then later on you're mentioning how the world is formed within the mind,
Yes.
and that all that we can know is the mind, but then I'm not quite sure if that's a kind of paradox, because if we can only be conscious momentarily, most of us can only be conscious momentarily, how then can we form, how then can we gain a conceptualization of the environment around us? And then I kind of wrote down the word solipsism, and
Yeah.
and the alternative view to that rather than all we can know is our mind, or perhaps we don't know our minds at all, or our minds are in flux. And that's just been rolling around my head for the last 10 minutes, essentially.
Yes, well, I mean, the Buddhist and the yoga schools both shared this recognition that the mind is a very changeable thing, indeed.
And that's the point, isn't it? That if the mind is always changing, then how can you, because as soon as you know your mind, it's changed again.
Yeah. So I wonder, I suppose that, is that why the Buddhists were arguing that there's no, because that's constantly changing, there's no like essence, substance thing that we can call mind or self.
Yeah, because as you say, whether it's Heraclitus or whether it's, we're talking about streams and rivers here, aren't we, again?
Yeah.
And people putting feet in streams and rivers. And all you can really know is yourself in the moment. And even then you might not know, because as soon as you've thought that, it's gone again. Which then throws questions of, well, the solipsistic questions,
Yeah.
into further question.
A lot has to do with our cultural education as well, doesn't it? So other cultures might have completely, because we don't know, like the Amazonian Indians or the Australian Aboriginals, they all had like philosophies, but their minds have developed completely differently to our minds because they've gone through a completely different education process. So, I mean, for all we know, they might view they might just see everything as consciousness. They might not view that the mind is changing all the time.
Yeah, from my very limited knowledge of Australian Aboriginals, they seem to have more of a sort of monism to their thinking.
What? Sorry.
Well, I just from my very basic knowledge of the Australian Aboriginals, there seems to be a monism in their thought of how we come from the earth and we return to the earth, and there's a cyclical process, and everything is temporary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Say that it's. form of monism. Yeah.
Yeah.
From what I know, which admittedly isn't a great deal.
But isn't the whole point of the fluctuations of the mind, or stopping the fluctuations of the mind, all the stuff that we work on all the time in meditation to find your,
essence
nature that we've been doing so much about for all this time.
Yeah, I mean, so
That's a good point.
the yogic view is indeed that there. I mean, that's what distinguishes, the yogic and other Vedic views from the Buddhist one is that there is this underlying, even though our mind changes from moment to moment, there's nevertheless an underlying thread that connects those moments, and that's the thing that we call, the seer, or the witness, whatever you want to call it, the Purusha, and that's what we're trying to drop into and access in yoga practice.
Who is doing the watching through our experience?
Yeah. And as for Buddhism, well, the practices ultimately are very similar. I mean, meditation practices, even though there's differences philosophically. So again, I mean, I've just finished working on the session 4, which is going to be very interesting, because it does look at these issues that we're talking about now.
On a more practical level, when are you doing the soul and self session, and when are you going to do the ethics session?
So the next session is all about epistemology. So about knowledge and what we can know about the world, and that's in a month's time. And then the one about the self is going to, because there's not going to be one in December, so it'll be in January, that one.
Okay.
In January. And then that means that the one on ethics will probably be in February, I think. I've not actually set dates for those two, but I can let you know.
How's it made you feel differently, Ben, about the things that you believe, really?
And
I only say that because we've sort of done so much about the tantric philosophies, and a lot of what you've said tonight seems to be so far away from that, and it just blows my mind that you sort of, or I've sort of because I've done some of the reading, and that I have, and you sort of think that you're understanding stuff, or you're beginning to understand stuff, and it's starting to make sense. And then this has sort of gone whoosh again, and I'm thinking, oh my God, where's all this come from? That's so left field, and I didn't know why when we spoke about the Vedas before, where have these all come from in the grand scheme of all of this? So,
well, that's I mean, in some ways, that's what it's all about, isn't it? The activity of philosophy, to keep continuously questioning your own views
So this must really be,
you've held, that you hold.
makes sense of Christopher Wallace saying that, if you are following a spiritual path, you've got to follow a spiritual path, otherwise you'd be
all over the place.
all over the place all the time. Wouldn't you?
There's a disadvantage if you follow one spiritual path. How do you know if it's the right spiritual path? So you could take a controversial topic like Islam, for example. So if people were to read more broadly and find the right path first that you should follow, that's probably better, isn't it, than just sticking to one path that you've not read a lot about. There's advantages and disadvantages, isn't there?
There is. I mean,
Yeah.
there is. I mean, I would think just from what Ben's said tonight and the way that it's made me feel when we got to the end, when we got to the stuff that we've talked so much about, it was just like, wow, we've come home now. This is great. I get this. This makes complete sense.
Familiarity with that view there.
Pardon?
I think is that because of your familiarity with that viewpoint? I
think I suppose it is largely, and you'd have to start, or I would certainly have to do a lot more reading of the other stuff, but it just sort of seemed straightforward and common sense, really, that probably because we've spent quite a lot of time speaking about it and thinking about it, and you get your head round something, and then this is whoosh.
It's only like my dad thinks Greek Orthodox resonates with him, and I grew up in a Greek Orthodox family. So when I started to go off the path of Greek Orthodoxy, my parents found it really, my dad in particular, but now he seems to embrace. But I still love certain parts of Greek orthodoxia. But there's loads of things I don't like as well. So, but I'm glad that I grew up and I knew that path. But I'm also glad that my parents gave me the opportunity to explore other different paths, because then I would have just followed that Greek Orthodox path, which a lot of people do, and they don't experience, and that causes problems, doesn't it? If you follow one path rigidly. So I understand what Harish is saying, because you don't develop any depth, do you? But I think you also have to be careful, don't you?
I mean, my nature is that I just like to explore
different things,
different views, and try and look at things from all these different ways, different angles. And
I think that's more empowering, isn't it?
I mean, and yes, that tantric Shaiva tantric view, does make a great deal of sense.
Definitely.
But then again, lots of the other schools as well also have things in them that resonate with me as well. So.
Yeah, I think I thought that was quite nice what Joe was saying there about, and what you were saying, Ben. That kind of resonates with me as well. I don't see myself as being on any form of path, or certainly not following any form of doctrine. It's about enlightenment generally. If there is a path, the path is simply to understand more, and that's it, and be open to whatever views come my way. So I certainly wouldn't put myself in any sort of school of thought, and perhaps that's the point, isn't it? As they were saying in the Buddhist slide at the end, that you have to rigid attachment. You sort of you prevent that sense of self-awakening if you do rigidly attach to it, whether it's Greek Orthodox or Scottish Presbyterianism. It's the same sort of thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
But there is something to people who do equally, I'm playing devil's advocate now, because like people who do follow a path and meditate a lot, like Francis of Assisi or the Dalai Lama, there's a certain quality to them that you don't get, do you? They seem to have like a deeper insight to reality. So having like a practice that supports. So once you've done like all your reading and everything like that, and you feel that something resonates with you, then having a practice that supports that, so you can go beyond the mind to attach to your essential nature, whatever it is, then that's a good thing, because a lot of people read a lot, but then don't connect to their essential nature. So you've got like loads of academics that like are really hot on religion and everything like that, but yet because they've done no practice, they're just all in their heads all the time, so they don't get beyond the philosophies or the religion that they're reading about, which is fine. But if we want, you're a little bit like that. But if you want society to change, to have a paradigm shift, I think you need to have a strong practice as well, which academia doesn't give you really, does it? I think you need both, maybe both paths.
So shall we do
You're leading.
chanting?
It's up to you.
Who would be interested in doing chanting? Just a little bit, Kirtan.
Is Rachel best?
She's upstairs at the moment, but she would probably be interested. I can go and I'll go and ask her.
Let me know. Sleeping. That's just the first thing, isn't it? Tracy, assumedly you would like to.
Yeah, thank you.
I just don't know whether it's... You want to do it? Jan?
Yeah, sure.
I don't want to make people do it if it's not... No? I need to move anyway.
No, it's fine. She's coming.
Oh,
Baby's still up.
has he gone to sleep?
Yeah, he's down finally.
Why are you holding him?
Just got his head over the shoulder.
Oh, okay. Does he not sleep does he sleep on you then all the time?
No, he just won't go down yet. I think when we go to bed, he'll probably go in his cot. He's just doing a lot of feeding at the moment.
Oh.
I think he'll enjoy the chanting.
Might go to sleep.
So So we're just going to do one chant this evening, and because it's now the first day of Navaratri, or the 9 divine nights of the goddess, and then we'll do Jayamata Kali, Jayamata Durga. So we'll start off call and response, I think. But unfortunately,
because of the time delay.
Yeah, because of the time delay with Zoom and the audio quality, I have to. We can't all hear each other's voices.
Mute.
Otherwise, it just doesn't sound good. So I have to mute you both. Well, of course, you can join in and sing along at home. Jayamata Durga, Jayamata Kali, Jayamata Durga, Jayamata Kali, Jayamata Durga, Jayamata Kali, Jayamata Durga. eyes closed, just drawing your awareness once again to the heart center, the heart space, such that your awareness is focused upon this area. And you can begin to visualize here a flower of your own choosing, any color, that's blossoming and unfurling there at the heart space. And here, placing a person or an animal or a place, or maybe the entire world, the entire universe, anything, anybody who you would like to send healing vibrations towards. And we'll close this session by chanting together that mantra, the mantra Om, 3 times on the wave of the next breath. Breathing deeply in. Being aware of the breath, feeling that whole body being gently, lovingly breathed. Feeling your physical body, the solidity of the body, seeming solidity of the body. And being aware of the world around you, sounds and movements in that world. A bit of movement returns to the body, wriggling the toes, the fingers. If you've got your hands free, then you might wish to start to rub the hands together to generate heat between the hands. And then there's a couple of things you can do, depending on what you prefer. You can cup them over the eyes, or you can cup those warm hands upon the heart space. And then from there, bringing the hands together, palms together, Anjali or Namaste gesture. Namaste.
Namaste.
So thank you very much who joined us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. That's lovely. Thank you. Good to see you.
Yeah, very nice.
Colin's taken lots of notes, so he's going to fill me in now.
You can watch the recording at a later date. I don't know where Ben's saving them though.
Oh, great. I'll do that then.
So yeah.
Great to see you, Reg.
Yeah, and you.
I am putting them on YouTube.
On the Yoga Nature page.
Yeah, I don't know whether I'll Well, the first one's public, so anybody can watch it. But these following ones, I don't know. I might just be for those who want to. I'll send them a link.
Yeah, great.
Lots of love, everyone.
Lots of love.
Yeah,
Thank you
good night.
so much.
Bye.
See you. See you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.